I think we'll go
Mhm.
ahead and start. So,
Do you
what was that?
do you see the people when we join?
I see them popping on. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. Today, I just wanted to go over some risk management. I know we're all in, a hot seller's market still, after almost a year and a half now of just being in kind of crazy market conditions. And I know we've been experiencing a lot of different things going on, and different tactics going on. But there's been a lot of questions coming about, usually with contingencies, things that got missed, because negotiations, with the offer and counter offer have been kind of rushed in a lot of scenarios. So, I just want to give everybody kind of a refresher on, taking a step back and looking at what is going to be best for the client and making sure that we're advising them properly, so that we don't hit some of these snags and things like that that come up after negotiations or even post closing. So, I think we'll start with just some general things that come up a lot with E&O insurance. I mean, just what comes about in the claims department the most often. Um, Number one would be getting it in writing. This sounds like such an easy thing. Obviously, we've heard it over and over and over again. Is it in writing, so on and so forth. But little things do get missed sometimes. Maybe you and another agent discuss an extension, but it actually doesn't get into writing. And then when that time comes around, all of a sudden we're getting a notice to perform or something like that. So, if the other agent is being lackadaisical with getting it in writing, you just really want to keep hounding them and remembering that you are bound to the contract. So this is an essential thing in real estate and many other uh, areas. But I guess I can go ahead and just read these as we go. So it's essential to get all important information in writing to avoid the he said, she said situations in a court of law. Those are really hard to prove when you're standing in front of a judge. So that's why we always want to have things in writing. All offers and acceptances, contract amendments and addendums, personal property items. This is one that comes up actually pretty often right now. Is not explaining in detail which personal items are going to convey refrigerators, fountains, things like that that aren't necessarily attached to the property. Um, Best practice on that usually is to actually write down all of the items in detail. Is it the blue plastic pots on the patio, the 4 red bar stools in the kitchen, et cetera, et cetera? Be that detailed. Have both parties sign the document to acknowledge it. Uh, Take it a step further, pictures of the items for your records are always great to have. This is stuff that you can pull up again when you go to do the walkthrough and you notice maybe some items are missing. Then you can refer back to your document, looking to see what exactly was supposed to convey, plus the pictures. There's really not going to be much of a leg to stand on for the other party. So another one is if you happen to discuss something important with your client or a co-op agent over the phone or video chat or anything like that, it's best to follow up with a recap of the conversation to ensure there's written record of that. So, and you want to do that the same, as soon as you can after that conversation took place. It's an important follow-up method to help avoid memory lapses or word twisting. Additionally, when you send the recap following the conversation, the other party does not reply with clarifications or rebuttals, it could be deemed in a court of law that the other party is or was in agreement with the statements made in the recap. So if you have a conversation, maybe it's obviously an important one, follow up with the points of that. And If they just say, okay, great, thanks, or something like that, then it's deemed that they agreed to everything you just recapped. Providing a list of preferred providers to buyers and sellers. This is something obviously that is very, very common in the industry. And it might seem helpful to provide a list of preferred providers to buyers and sellers when they ask for recommendations, but you always want to consider the consequences of a bad customer experience, which that can happen even with your most trusted referrals. So what if that building inspector you suggest misses something crucial and the buyer launches a lawsuit when they find out something is seriously wrong? Well, the first person, the attorneys always go back to is obviously the home inspector, but also the listing brokerage or the selling brokerage and the agent involved. So it's best to first encourage them to do their own due diligence and independent research. If they don't want to use the research and ask for a referral, then it can be acceptable to provide contacts for services for them to hire. So, in the world of reviews, everybody has reviews online. It's easy to find service providers. There's places like Angie's List and things like that that have lots of recommended home inspectors and other services. So consider asking them to do their own research first, and then if they just don't want to, or if they want a referral from you, then go ahead and provide them a couple. Failure to disclose. Again, this is something that we hear quite often. Most real estate lawsuits arise because of a failure to disclose. As real estate professionals, we must disclose anything about the property that could affect its value and desirability and advise our clients to do the same. Honesty is truly always the best case. So even if the disclosure may affect the sales price or commission, when completing disclosures, I always tell my clients, the state of California wants the buyer to know everything you know about this house. So usually when I explain it to them that way, they get pretty good about disclosing things that have happened or that they know about since they've been in the home. So if you know about it, you must disclose it. If you're questioning if you should disclose it, you should probably disclose it. Making suggestions beyond your expertise. Obviously, we learned this one in real estate school, but only provide advice in the context of your role as a real estate professional. Don't make suggestions or recommendations to your client which extends beyond the scope of your expertise. For other unrelated inquiries, legal issues, tax issues, encourage your clients to undertake independent research and contact the sources and or licensed professionals who specialize in the subject of inquiry. I even do this with 1031 exchanges, just in case I'm not caught up on something. I'll just refer them straight to an exchanger contact that we have, and they can ask all the questions they want. Same thing with any tax related stuff. I refer them straight back to their tax person. But other things that we don't think about sometimes, just because if you've been in the business a while, you've seen a lot of things, and what those things actually were, you don't want to make assumptions when you're talking to your client about certain aspects that you come across. So such as, those black spots behind the mold, toilet or mold, you don't want to ever assume that that's what that is, even though more than likely that might be what it is. You would just say, instead, during my visual inspection, I noticed some discoloration behind the wall. I advise you to seek further evaluation from a licensed professional. Let them find out what the problem actually is. Same thing, crack in the stucco. Could be from house settling, it could be from poor application, it could be a number of things. So again, refer them over to a licensed professional to assess those cracks instead. This is kind of a tough one. The open space behind the yard looks to be unbuildable, so your view will never go away. I always like to say never say never. So instead, you should ask them to check with the city to verify the zoning and buildability of that area behind the house to make sure it's going to be preserved. Let them ask the city you know, are there upcoming plans, so on and so forth. You know, post-tension slabs never crack, you know, refer them over. Here's a list of items you can write off to lower your tax liabilities. I don't ever say things like that. I refer them again straight to the CPA. Been on hundreds of home inspections, and that doesn't look like a big deal. This one I see come up quite a bit, where maybe an agent alludes to the fact that something that's in the home inspection is not that costly to repair, or maybe not that big of a deal. You know, what may not be a big deal to them, or maybe some of their past clients, could be a really big deal to someone else. So don't ever make those kinds of assumptions. Just have it addressed with the listing agent or the seller, or again, refer them to getting a licensed professional out there to satisfy their concerns. Title checks. We've had this come up a little bit more recently because there's trust sales, lots of trust sales going on, LLCs from flipped house, things like that. So if you're getting the listing, do your title check as soon as you can to make sure that you're dealing with the correct owners of the property, and to also make sure that there isn't someone on title that not necessarily shouldn't be there, but is going to be hard to contact, or maybe they've, you know, passed away or something like that. So you need to make sure that you have your paperwork in line when you're doing the listing agreement to make sure that you're dealing with the correct people. Again, especially important in a trust or entity like an LLC. If it isn't an LLC or an entity, you want to make sure that you get the paperwork of the LLC to make sure that you're dealing with the correct signers, because if there's multiple members of the LLC, it could be that only one needs to sign. It could be that all of them have to sign when there's a big decision like this, as far as, you know, the sale of a property. Client communications. Obviously, we're all busy here. Patricia was just telling us about a lender that wasn't communicating on one of her deals. Excuse me. This comes up quite a bit, you know, especially if you're dealing with multiple clients, several properties at once. You want to keep the communication up as often as possible. Anytime there's, you know, anything pertinent that comes up, contingency release dates, things like that. You know, don't put it on the back burner. Be sure to let all parties know what's going on. It's an essential part of running a successful real estate business, and it can also help you from having disgruntled clients who may be inclined to sue you in the future. Or maybe even they don't take it that far, but it could be, you know, a bad review, which obviously none of us want. Wire fraud. You know, we've all read the stories about home buyers getting scammed out of their down payment funds. There's even cases where agents have been scammed out of their commissions. We had one of our agents a couple of years ago receive a phishing email from what it appeared to be from me, saying to have the commission wired to a different account. This raised a red flag with her because she knows that I don't have commissions wired to the company account in general. So she actually called me and asked about the email, which was great. And I said, no, that was definitely not for me. So, you know, she could have been scammed out of the commission. To avoid this type of situation, be clear with your clients about transaction process and ensure they're always aware of potential phishing and wire fraud scams. Be sure to follow up emails regarding wire transfers with a telephone call, instructing the recipient not to change instructions without an email and verification by telephone call. This is important for your escrow officers too. You know, if your clients are going to be wiring funds, I really like it when my escrow officers contact the buyer as well. So I want them to be in communication. And I advise them, you know, if you're getting emails that look a little suspicious, or if they're coming in from escrow and title, or even you, maybe at weird hours of the night, to definitely let us know about it, because that's not going to be typical. I'll give this handout out with the replay. There's a link right here that you can click to view some best practices for avoiding wire fraud. Completing disclosures properly. We see this quite often too, especially with the statutory ones, the TDS, the SPQ, that the seller just doesn't complete it fully, or they're missing sections, they missed a box. We really need all of these to be completed fully. I use Seller Shield in this instance because it does assist them in completing disclosures completely and to the best of their ability. And additionally, it comes back completely typed out, nothing's hard to read. If they have a text overflow addendum, it attaches right away. So that's one of the reasons why I use that service, Seller Shield. It is an extra step, but it also creates a little bit of a buffer between me and the client when they start asking me, hey, what should I say here? This walks them through the disclosures from a bit of a legal standpoint and answers their questions as they go. So it makes it a little bit easier for them, and it puts a little buffer between me and the client, so they can't come back and say, well, you said I shouldn't check that box, or that I should check that box. The bonus with that is our E&O carrier, if you have your disclosures filled out through Seller Shield, if there's a post-closing claim, they will take care of the deductible for you. So that's a little bit of a bonus for you as a real estate agent to use Seller Shield if you have a listing. Use the forms you're given. So there's just about a form for everything here in California. So if you're needing to make a modification to a contract or something like that, check to see if there's a form, because more than likely there is. We know that there's a lot of paperwork here in California with the advisories and disclosures, but it's all there for a reason. They help us mitigate risk for everybody. So just because a form isn't a statutory requirement or required by the brokers doesn't mean it doesn't serve a purpose or shouldn't be completed. So I'm just going to go over a few forms that I get questions on a lot. The first one is going to be when you're dealing with a home within a homeowners association. Everybody knows that we should use the BHAA. I like to think that and the PSD go hand in hand. Many agents believe the PSD, the parking and storage disclosure, is only used when the sale is a condo or townhome. But there are plenty of detached home communities that have parking restrictions, such as no overnight parking on the street, no parking in the driveway overnight, or parking allowed only on one side of the street. I actually had this come up with a listing about 2 years ago at my friend's community. I was listing their home. They live in a gated community, and I didn't know it, but you're not supposed to park overnight there. It's an HOA violation to park overnight on the street. So when I sold their home, I had them also fill out the parking and storage disclosure along with the homeowners association advisory. So, and you'll see here in section 3 of the PSD, that the seller can further disclose, obviously, the parking restrictions. So we know that they're going to be in the CC&R package, but that doesn't mean that the buyer is going to read that. I mean, those packages are really, really long. Most buyers don't read them. So I want the buyer to know, especially if I'm on the listing side, that there is a parking restriction here or there is not a parking restriction here for the single family homes. Buyer inspection advisories. So the RPA package obviously includes the BIA, which is the buyer inspection advisory by default. For me, this isn't enough to get my point across. I go for the trifecta. So they get the BIA with the RPA. which talks about the importance of property investigations as well as obligations of the parties involved. I also have them sign and complete the BIE, which is the buyer inspection elections. We know that inspections are available, but does your buyer? This is a great form for disclosing all the available inspections that can be performed on a home and on vacant land. I definitely include that on vacant land as well, because that's a big question when someone is purchasing land as well. What kind of inspections can I get, should I get? So the BIE is just a really good form with a complete list of inspections that a buyer can get on the property. So have them check the boxes, don't check the boxes for them, and then have them sign at the bottom. So then you have disclosed to them the types of inspections that are available on the property. HID, which is the for-year protection, get a home inspection. This is a mandatory one for FHA purchases, but truthfully, I use it on all the purchases, even on land. This form states big and bold that for your protection, get a home inspection. Why would I not want this included in my buyer disclosure package? So those are the three forms that I use all the time for basically just, I guess, pounding it into my buyer's head that, hey, you should get this property inspected or this parcel of land inspected, or, you know, to check on buildability and suitability and zoning and everything else when you're dealing with the land. So you can see the arrows right there. It talks about it again. So that's 3 times that you're mentioning during the transaction about getting the home inspection. I sent out just a message actually on Facebook about this Ontario couple that bought the home, and the listing agent wanted them to waive inspections. And lo and behold, after they moved into the home, it had well issues, it had sewer issues, and they're into this home now for over $100,000 in repairs because they waived their inspections. Obviously, up in Canada, it's a little different. You know, this probably wouldn't have gone this far here in California, not without a lawsuit. But when the PDF comes out on the replay, if you want to click that, if you didn't see it, it'll take you right over to a little 2-minute video. So risky actions in acting against the advice of the broker. With the craziness of the current market conditions, emotions are running high, desperation to get into a home, it can all lead to risky actions and requests from your clients that can lead to complaints, claims, and loss of earnest money deposits. So there actually is I guess it's a form in the forms library. This is where you would find it. So it's under the car sample letters, and there's one for the buyer and there's one for the seller. And what this looks like is, you know, maybe you have a buyer that's removing contingencies up front. They're failing to make property investigations. They're making multiple offers on more than one property, even though they're only intending to buy one property. This form, I would have them sign and check the boxes of what they're doing so they know that what they're doing is risky behavior and we're advising against that. Seller rent backs. This seems to be like on every occupied property right now. It's important to negotiate these while you're doing the counters or the offer. There's nothing wrong or risky necessarily about the rent back itself. It's the issue that they're not being clear up front. So it's just saying that, hey, seller may need a rent back for up to 30 days. Okay, great. And then everybody moves forward. But then we get closer to close of escrow, and then all of a sudden they're asking about deposits and different things like that that weren't expressed in the beginning, and then we hit it, you know, these snags. So in the counter offer or offer, you know, touch on those points to make sure there's clarity up front. You know, how long will it be? Is it 29 days or less? Then you're going to use Form SIP. If it's 30 days or longer, then you're going to use the RLAS. Consideration, the amount of rent to be paid during occupancy. Generally, a per diem calculation of the buyer's PITI is what I see, but it can literally be anything. It could be free. I see all kinds of stuff being negotiated right now. But this can be stated in the counteroffer without knowing the buyer's actual payment at time of offer. You would just put, you know, that the amount is to be a prorated amount of the buyer's PITI. So you'll notice in section 2 of the SIP that the seller is paying a non-refundable license fee to remain in the property for the term specified in section 1 at a per diem specified in that section. So you will also notice in the same section that the seller is to either deposit the funds for this term into escrow prior to close of escrow or have the amount withheld from their proceeds. Then at close of escrow, the funds are released to the buyer or held in escrow, however you have that typed up. Per the SIP, if the seller vacates early, no portion of the funds will be returned. That's something that a lot of agents kind of miss, is if they're doing the SIP, which is technically a license to remain in the property, if they're paying, you know, $2,000 for the 29 days, if they end up leaving after the 15th day, there's the seller, or actually the buyer, is not obligated to refund any amount. That was their license fee to remain in the property. So, you know, keep that in mind as well. Utilities, we just had this one come up where there is a discrepancy on who's paying what utilities. Also add in pool service, landscaping service, if that applies to the home. You know, who will be maintaining those services while the rent back is in place. Insurance, this one also gets missed a lot. You know, if they're going to be staying in the home for any amount of time, you want to reduce the liability for the buyer. The seller should have a renter's policy in place at close of escrow. The seller should be required to show proof of policy prior to close of escrow as well. And then security deposit, you know, is there one to be held in escrow? What is the amount? That's probably the one I see come up the most often, is all of a sudden, you know, buyer realizes that they should have a security deposit for the seller during the rent back period, and then it's kind of too late to try and negotiate that when it's getting close to close of escrow if it hasn't already been addressed. So here's a sample of the SIP form if you haven't seen that one. I'm sure most of you have. And then the last one, just contingent purchases and sales. Be sure that you're stating this during the negotiation period or even before, but it needs to be in the contract in some way. If the sale of the home is contingent upon the purchase of another home, you're going to use the SPRP. And if the purchase is contingent upon the sale of another home, then you're going to use the COP. So you want to make sure that you have those contingencies in place. I've run into a couple snags over the past year or two where that wasn't expressed, that, you know, the purchase was contingent upon something else happening, and it got a little scary, I guess. So for everyone, because you know, the sellers thought that they had that contingency in place and they didn't, and they thought they were going to have to move twice or not have a home to live in. So definitely make sure you put those into place. And the bigger thing too is to make sure that you're stating when the timelines for the contingencies start. For the SPRP, this is in section 2A, and you're going to state if the time periods for, you know, your due diligence periods, things like that, start as expressed in the RPA, or if they're going to start once the seller delivers the buyer written notice removing the find and replacement contingency. So meaning no time periods would start whatsoever on the inspections and things like that until the seller says, hey, I've identified a property and we're releasing this contingency now. For the COP, same thing. When are you starting the buyer investigation, so on and so forth? Is it as soon as the offer is accepted or after the buyer's property goes into escrow? So those are important. Actually, they're very, very important to make sure that you have those expressed properly in the beginning. So other than that, there's so many. I mean, I can probably go on for another half hour going over different forms and things like that. But, these are some of the ones that come up pretty routinely. If there's any others that you guys have questions on, obviously just let me know. But other than that, if nobody has any questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Just checking here. I don't see any other questions. So feel free to reach out directly if you do have any, if you're shy and you don't want to talk over the Zoom. But other than that, I hope everybody has a great week and we'll talk to you later.